So as we come together this morning, Jeannie and John painted a beautiful picture for us. And I invite you, if you can, where you are, close your eyes and try to feel the feeling of what these words today are conveying. Today is about feeling. It is about opening our hearts. The title is From Your Head to Your Heart, the longest 18 inches in the world. And of course that has several different meanings. Emmett Fox, who's one of my favorite authors, I just love the way that he tells stories and relates things. And he says, you know, the scripture of the world, the scriptures are kind of like when men first discovered diamonds in Africa. They started digging in the soil and they found more diamonds in a layer of soil than they had ever found in any other layer. And they just thought that it was tremendous, and they kept digging and they kept digging and they kept digging. And they got down to a different layer of soil where the clay turned blue. And when they hit the blue layer, they found even more diamonds than they had found in the first layer. And what Fox tells us is that our spiritual growth, our studying, our listening to talks, our reading the scriptures, our reading inspirational stories, that it's like mining for diamonds. It's like we go through maybe for a period of years and we get one meaning out of things. And then one day we find out that there's a deeper meaning, a deeper level, a deeper way of knowing the material, what the material is trying to tell us. And today, where we're going today is that deeper level is feeling, is our feeling level. It's not our intellect, it's not our ego, but it's our feeling nature. So we want to open our hearts up to feeling today. So if sitting on a rocking chair at the beach doesn't work for you, then find your spot. Find your spot where you can go and you can sit and you can just feel. You can open yourself up to feel. Now, we talk about from the head to the heart, the longest 18 inches in the world. And the first level that starts to work at is, do you believe it in your subconscious mind, or do you believe it at a level of consciousness below your level of awareness? We always get into trouble when trying to talk about this, because your subconscious mind is not really unconscious. It's not a separate entity from you. You know, it's not like your evil twin or anything like that. But it is a wealth of knowledge, a world of information that is generally unknown to the conscious mind. And for the sake of today's discussion, I'm just going to say the conscious mind is your field of awareness, what you become aware of, right? So there's things going on in part of you that you are not consciously aware of, yet they take place, and they take place quite perfectly. Your heart is beating, your lungs are moving, your food is digesting. You know, all of these things are controlled by something other than your intellect, other than your conscious thought. So in the scriptures of the world, we have many references to the heart. We're told in Old Testament, in I believe it's Psalms or Proverbs, can't remember which. As you think and believe in your heart, as a man thinks and believes in his heart, so is he. So is he. And then later in the New Testament it's restated in a different way. Pray believing in your heart that it shall be, and it shall. Pray believing in your heart that it is, and it shall be. Excuse me. So there's this idea that the heart is a symbol for something, right? It's something other than the intellect. It doesn't say, as you think and believe in your intellect. It says, as you think and believe in your heart. It doesn't say when you pray, pray believing. It says pray believing in your heart. So there's some significance there. There's some significance to this idea of the heart. And we want to look at that today. And the first level, keeping the idea of digging for diamonds and coming down to the first level. The first level of interpretation of that typically means your subconscious mind. And perhaps a better term is your subliminal mind. Right? It's something that you're aware of, but you're not consciously aware of, your subliminal mind. So it's possible to know something, it's possible to believe something, like if I asked you, do you believe, you might say, oh yeah, I believe that. But it's also possible that at a deeper level, at a deeper level of where our subconscious mind functions, that we don't really grasp it, we don't really understand it. We have not absorbed it yet. Okay, we have not really come to accept it yet. There's still part of us that is operating out of the old paradigms. So, for example, trying to change a habit, when we're looking at change and we're trying to change a habit, many things that we do that are involved in habitual activities, we do without conscious thought. We just do them. We do them out of habit. It's kind of the term is self-explanatory. Right? We do them out of habit. We do them without thinking, oh, well, now I'm going to go do this. We just find ourselves doing it. And in trying to help people change habits, one of the techniques that counselors would use is to have them keep track of when they do something. So, for example, smoking cessation, they would have people keep track of every time they lit up a cigarette. What was going on when they lit up a cigarette? Did they get a cup of coffee and they lit up a cigarette? Did the phone ring and they lit up a cigarette? Just trying to associate, trying to make them aware, to bring into their field of awareness what was going on outside their field of awareness, to try to get them become aware of it. And then once they become aware of it, then they could kind of make a different choice, you see. But the first step was to acknowledge that there were things taking place outside the field of awareness, outside the field of consciousness, that they needed to become aware of. One of the examples we used to use in teaching change techniques was going to a foreign country where they drive on the other side of the road, because many of our people in the audience had done that, because they worked for multinational companies and they would travel the world. Now you can know that in England they drive on the other side of the road. You know that. You watch TV, you watch movies. The steering wheel's on the other side of the car. They're driving on the other side of the road. You're aware of that intellectually. You may even go to the airport and go rent a car and get in the car and realize that you're sitting on the wrong side because the steering wheel is on the other side of the car. Don't ask me how I know that. You may be able to force yourself as you're driving to remember, I've got to drive on the other side of the road. I've got to drive on the other side of the road. I can't drive like I do back home. I've got to drive on the other side of the road. So by forcing an awareness, by forcing yourself to maintain conscious awareness of where you are and what you're doing, you might be able to successfully drive that car for a while on the other side of the road. But if you go park that car and then go to walk across the street, you'll probably look over the wrong shoulder. You'll probably look over the wrong shoulder. Right? Because here in America, when we step off the curb, we look to our left because that's where traffic is coming. In England, you have to look to your right because that's where traffic is coming. So it's not until people actually step out in front of a car and hear the horn blowing and hear the tires screeching that they go, oh, I really haven't embodied this concept that here they drive on the other side of the road. Okay? So the first level that we're talking about when we're talking about the 18 inches from the head to the heart is a reference to believing something, embodying it so completely that there's nothing within us, not even in our subconscious mind or subliminal mind, not even that disagrees with what we're saying, that disagrees, that doesn't believe. It's there. We have it. If we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody asks us, we'll believe it. We'll have it. And this kind of developing this level of embodiment and this level of awareness, then there are many different techniques to do that. And if you look at many of the techniques that we get from psychology and self-help books and magazines and things like that, they are designed to try to somehow get down into that deeper level of knowing that we call the subconscious mind and affect a change there, whether it be a program of hypnosis or a program of repetition, or one point it was visualization. You would look at a green screen and you would visualize yourself performing a certain activity, like a sports activity, a golf swing or a tennis swing, something like that. But somehow, kind of through deliberate, constant reinforcement, we were chipping away at everything within our subconscious mind that still thought the old way, that still believed the old way. In our spiritual practice, we use affirmations in a very similar way. So there's all kinds of opinions that you'll hear people give about using affirmations, and they say, well, if you really knew it, you wouldn't need the affirmation. And that is absolutely true. But not saying the affirmation isn't the way to get you to believe it, right? To get your subconscious to believe it. So you might say, well, that's absolutely true. An affirmation is a statement of something that my intellect knows to be true, my intellect believes to be true, but there's still a part of my old belief system habitually buried deep down in my subconscious that isn't there yet. So what I am doing is I am reminding myself of that which I know to be true until there's no longer any resistance within me. So the technique that Lori and I would teach in the classes is, if you take a blank sheet of paper and across the top of the piece of loose leaf paper, you write down whatever affirmation it is that you're working on. Then you read it out loud. Of course, you would do this somewhere where you had privacy. You would read it out loud. And then whatever the first thing that came into your mind following your reading out loud, you would write it down. And then you would not judge it, not analyze it, not even pay too much attention to it. Just write it down. Just kind of let it come through the pen. Let it come through the pen onto the paper. And then you say it again, and then you write it down. And then you say it again, and then you write it down. And if you get to a point where you're stuck, you write down, nothing's coming to me. Just in order to keep your hand moving. Nothing's coming to me. Nothing's coming to me. And then sometimes what happens is more will come after that. More responses, I guess is the best way to put it, a response from your subconscious mind. Eventually what happens is you do kind of run out. There's nothing else that you can write. So an example might be, you might be working on prosperity, and I use this in the classes. You might be working on prosperity, and I think it was Louise Hay who gave the affirmation, I am a prosperous child of an abundant universe. Let's say you're working with that. And the first few things that you write might be pretty negative, like, oh yeah, I wish that were true, or who are you trying to kid, or whatever comes up. It's okay. You don't judge it. You just keep writing. But after a while, the responses start to turn positive. They start to say, well, that must be true because I'm a a child of God. Divine love is everything. Divine love has everything. Divine love has created me out of itself. So after a while, what you find when you go back and you analyze what you've written down is that you may start off with some negative responses, which are the old belief system, the old ideas. What you're trying to do is you're trying to shake these things up. You know, you're trying to rattle them loose from wherever they've been embedded, and trying to shake them up so that they can leave, if you want to think of it that way. So what the spiritual technique of affirmations is doing, what other psychology techniques, you know, self-hypnosis and all those things is doing, they're all trying to address this issue of believing in the heart, where the heart is represented by the subconscious mind, And that's good as far as it goes. That's good as far as it goes, right? So I may read a book and I may come across an idea or I may listen to a talk and I may hear an idea and I may think, wow, yeah, that's a great idea. That's got to be true. That's something I really, really want to embody. But like driving in England and then getting out of the car, we know that there's something within us that it still doesn't quite sit right. It still doesn't quite feel right, you know. And then affirmations might be a tool that can help us get to the point where we shake loose, we break up those old ideas. Of course, we use spiritual mind treatment to actively set in motion what we call the law of mind, the power that responds to us according to our belief, to also produce within our consciousness, within all consciousness, the change or changes that are necessary. And those changes, by the way, are always a process of elimination. They're never a process of addition. God already is. God already is perfect. God already has enough and plenty. God knows perfect health, you know. So when we are doing our affirmative prayers, we're doing our spiritual mind treatment, we're not trying to make God do anything God hasn't already done. We're trying to get ourselves, as Emerson said, get your bloated nothingness out of the way. We're trying to let those old ideas that we have accumulated through this lifetime and God knows how many other lifetimes, these old ideas that we are just trying to let them break down. Their time has come, their time has gone. So if we can bring ourselves to a deeper level of embodying the truth, then of course it's more likely, it's easier for us to have a more complete demonstration of that truth. But that's only layer one. That's only the beginning. So where we want to go today, what we're talking about today, is an even deeper level. An even deeper level. We're going down to the blue clay. We're going down to where the more diamonds existed, as Emmett Fox would put it. And this is going to our feelings, our feeling nature that we experience as emotions. Dr. Holmes tells us in an essay that he wrote in the book Living the Science of Mind, he says he's going to offer an opinion and he's willing to accept the fact that it could be wrong, but he doesn't believe it to be wrong. But he wants us to consider it. And that idea is that the essence of God, the creative impulse of the universe is feeling. In other places he tells us that love is the creative impulse of the universe. That God creates out of joy. See, what are these things, love and joy, other than feelings, you see? They're not just an intellectual idea. Now, we can have intellectual ideas about what love is, you know. We can have words that tell us about love and falling in love and our doo-wop rock and roll songs of the 50s and the 60s, you know. I can't live if living is without you kind of love and all those things. But that's not love. Those are ideas about love. Ideas about love. They're not really love. Love is this feeling of unity. Love is this feeling of oneness. And unconditional love is this feeling or the experience of unity that doesn't depend on anything. Doesn't depend on how another behaves, how they treat you, whether you are related to them or not related to them. It doesn't depend on any of those things. All of those things are barriers that human consciousness has created. We love the people, we love our people, whoever our people are, but we don't have to love those people over there. And you can understand through the eons of evolution, you can understand that it was best perhaps for safety reasons to not trust people that you didn't know. But that doesn't mean you can't love them. You see, you can't experience oneness with them. You can't experience unity with them. So in the scripture we are told to love our enemies and to pray for our enemies. And how can we do that? See, how can we love somebody who hates us? How can we love somebody who's trying to harm us? And that's where the growth is. See, we have to open our hearts to compassion. To compassion. Compassion is the key to opening the heart to love. I think when there's something that we call tragic happening in the world, as there always seems to be, the news is full of it. Right now as we speak, our brothers and sisters in the Bahamas are being pounded by tremendous winds that many of us can only imagine, we'll never experience. And it's kind of easy to turn on the TV set and see that little red dot moving across the ocean on the maps. But when we stop and realize that there are human beings there, human beings who are frightened, who may be losing their homes, some may be losing their lives and their loved ones. See, it is this compassion, it is this empathy that we feel that brings us more fully into the experience, more fully into the realization. I think it was Joseph Stalin, I don't know the context of the quote, but Stalin is quoted as saying, the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 20 million people is a statistic, you see. What we have learned to do in order to kind of protect ourselves from being overwhelmed by empathy, by being overwhelmed. See, we can have empathy without being consumed by it. That's what we have to keep in mind. But what we have done as a society, as a culture, in order to survive as human consciousness evolved, was we have built up these barriers around our hearts that allow us to try not to feel the humanness, try not to feel the suffering, try not to have compassion as a means of protecting ourselves. I know some of the folks in our group were also in the service, and the thing that we were taught from the day we took our step forward, or at least where I was in the Army, was that the enemy was not the same as us. The enemy was less than. The enemy was less than human. The enemy was always referred to with a derogatory name. Inflicting harm upon the enemy was a good thing to be laughed about, to be joked about. And they were teaching our soldiers that attitude because it's kind of impossible for somebody to go pick up a rifle and shoot at someone they love. shoot at someone they consider to be just like me. Just like me. This person is just like me. You know, their government came and got them and put a uniform on them and gave them a rifle and sent them to the front, and they came and got me and put a uniform on me and sent me to the front, and now we're going to shoot at one another. But this is a human being with a family and a home and a mother and a wife and children. They wouldn't let us see the enemy as that. They had to be dehumanized in order for the soldiers to be effective. So what we have done in order to keep ourselves from feeling, to keep ourselves from being overwhelmed with the empathy of the suffering in the world, is to somehow treat everything as a statistic. The things that we don't want to deal with are statistics. We don't have to worry about that. We don't have to feel about that. We can keep our hearts closed off. This is what our society does. Watch the way when they're talking about things on TV, watch the way that they're talking about them. Most of the time in the news, it's numbers, you know. Until the storm hits, until the tragedy hits, and then they want to go out with the microphone and ask people, well, how do you feel? Well, now how do you feel? Then they want to kind of bring our emotions into it. But the politicians want us to be thinking in terms of statistics. These are not human beings who are suffering. These are statistics. Because that gives us a level of insulation and isolation. And what I'm suggesting here is, now that's not true for everybody. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I'm saying we have to be aware that that is kind of built into our society. And it's only when we start to recognize that each and every other person is a human being just like we are, who not only craves love, but deserves love. And a clean place to sleep, and food to eat, and all of the things that we as human beings should have. See, it's only when we start to make that transition that we have opened up our heart. We have opened up our heart. So this next level down is feeling and feeling the unity of life, feeling the oneness with the power, feeling the oneness with the love, feeling the oneness with the omniscience of God. So we can say God is all there is and God is good. Therefore, goodness is the only thing that exists on the planet. And those are words. And we can repeat them over and over and over again until we believe them at the level of our subconscious mind. But do we really feel it? Do we really feel it? Do we really feel that love? Do we really feel that oneness? Do we really feel that unity? So I'm going to flip back a minute to something we talk about from time to time, and that's the chakra system that comes to us, the 7 chakras that we get from the East. Now, different religions and different cultures have different systems. In Jewish mysticism, there's 10 chakras. Just think of it as an energy center. Just think of it as a focus of attention, you know. And in the 7 chakra system, the first 3 deal with living on Earth. The first one deals with survival. We have to stay alive. We have to have food. We have to have shelter. And I mentioned maybe a month or so ago that Maslow took these and put them into the pyramid he called the hierarchy of needs. And everybody said, oh, wow, that's wonderful. But all he was doing was restating ancient wisdom in a modern way. So first we must survive, you know. We must have that. And then once we have that, we want to increase that. You know, we want to be able to secure our survival. We want to be able to procreate. And whether that procreation is having children or whether that procreation is increasing our farm animals, the acres that we till, things like that. We want to grow. Okay? We want to grow. And then the next one comes to willpower and power and control. We want to have it our way. We want things to be our way. And those things are common to almost all creatures, right? Not just human beings, but all creatures. Have to survive. They want to reproduce. They want to kind of have control of their bailiwick, their domain, or their territory. And it's not until you get to the heart, that we start to experience our spiritual nature. So in the Buddhist symbolism, the symbol for the heart chakra is two overlaid triangles, one with the apex pointing up and the other with the apex pointing down. The heart chakra, which is normally considered our center for love, the heart chakra is where the human meets the divine. It is the center, if you want to call it, it is the center of Christ consciousness, where the human meets the divine. In Christianity, you have the symbol of the cross. You have the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal, and it intersects at the heart. In Buddhism, you have the mythology that the Buddha was born from his mother's side. He came from the heart. The Christ consciousness is from the heart. The Buddha consciousness is from the heart. It is when we start to open our hearts to feel, to allow ourselves to feel, that we really move forward on our spiritual journey. So we can have it intellectually, and that's okay. We can drill it into our subconscious mind through repetition, through the use of spiritual practices such as treatment and affirmations, visualizations, those sorts of things. But it's only when we really feel it. It's only when we really feel it. Feel our oneness with life. Feel our unity with God itself. Feel the presence and the activity of the divine. This is when we truly begin our spiritual journey. So the question then becomes, well, if that's true, if what Jim just said is true, then how do we do that? How do we do that? So the first thing we want to recognize then is that I use the symbolism of the golden Buddha that Alan Cohn related the story. It's not his story, but he related it in Joy is Your Compass. That in this monastery in Thailand, they had this Buddha statue that was made of gold, big, huge statue of a meditating Buddha. And a warlord from a neighboring area was going on a rampage and coming through. And the monks wanted to know what to do. What are they going to do with this statue? It was too heavy to move. It was too big to chop apart. What were they going to do? And they decided to hide it in plain sight. And what they did was they mixed a layer of mortar or cement, and they troweled it over the statue so it looked like the statue was made of stone or concrete. But it was really a golden statue that was layered in concrete. And the warlords came and the soldiers marched right past this, what they thought was a big concrete statue of the Buddha, when in fact it was covered with gold. It was gold covered with cement. And time went on, and all of the monks who had been there, who understood that it was really a golden Buddha, they all died off, and the secret died off with them. And it was many, many years later that a young monk was sitting on the lap of the Buddha in the statue, meditating, and he wiggled and he moved, and the concrete slid loose, and they discovered that gold in there. So I think our hearts are like that. I think the love is there. I think the part of us that knows how to love and how to be loved and how to embrace each and every other person as an expression of the divine, whether they behave properly or not. I think that's already there. That's the gold within us. But we have layered our hearts with layer upon layer upon layer of protective coating to keep us from feeling. And what we have to do is we have to let that coating go. So two things we want to talk about there. One is how do we open our hearts, and two is how do we keep from being overwhelmed when we do that? Because this feeling of sudden emotional rushes, just kind of being overwhelmed by our emotions, this is part of the journey. This is part of the path. If you read of people who write about being on the journey, is they come to a point where it's just, I think it was Carolyn Myss said that she didn't know anybody who became a mystic who hadn't gone insane somewhere along the way. And Dr. Holmes defined insanity as when we were ruled by our emotions. And I think this feeling of emotions coming through when the heart gets open is something that we just need to be aware of and not be afraid of. Not be afraid of it when it happens, but to embrace it and to know that this is good, that my heart is opening up, that I am allowing myself to feel and to experience things that perhaps I never did before. And it is because this triangle pointing down, this triangle pointing up, it is because now my humanity is touching my divinity that I'm starting to experience these things. So one thing that we can do in the process of opening it is you can do a technique, learn a technique of energy meditation, Kundalini meditation, Kundalini being spiritual energy. And the idea in that technique is that we start out our life with our spiritual energy coiled like a snake at the base of our spine. And as we grow spiritually, that energy can move up through the chakras, up through the heart, up through the throat, eventually to the crown chakra, to the top of the head. So we used to do a technique when we had the meditation classes at the center where we would have people sit and breathe in, and as you breathe in, you kind of visualize this energy moving up your spine from the tip of your spine up to the top of your head as you inhale, and then as you exhale, it comes back down, but maybe it comes back down the front. So it kind of comes down through your nose and comes down through your rib cage, and then goes back down to the tip of your spine. And when we were doing that, what would happen from time to time is people would do that with us, and they would say that they had a funny feeling in their chest as they were doing that, as their heart started to open, just a sensation. So if that's something that interests you, you can find more about that. You can buy books on that, and you can read on that, and you might be able to practice how to do that. How to learn how to meditate on your heart chakra, learn how to open up your heart chakra in your visualizations, in your meditations, But the other way, and perhaps an easier way for people, because this idea of moving energy through your body is not something that we're generally taught here in the West. It sounds a little bit too esoteric to people. But the other way is a way that almost all religions, I can't think of one that doesn't teach it, is compassion. Is compassion. In Christianity, we're given beautiful, beautiful ideas, Whatever you've done to the least of my brothers, this you have done unto me. We used to sing that at church on Sundays. When you came and visited me in jail, when you came and visited me when I was sick, when I was hungry and you gave me food, when I was thirsty and you gave me water, excuse me. This what you've done to the least of my brothers, your brothers. This you have done unto me. This beautiful idea of compassion. In Buddhism, they take it a step further. And in Buddhism, there's a sutra, a teaching attributed to the Buddha himself that basically instructs us through a meditation to treat all living beings to love all living beings as a mother would love her only child. As a mother would love her only child. And I'm only going to give you part of the meditation. I'm going to give you the general ideas. If you want to explore it more, you can read up on the Heart Sutra. You can read up on exchanging yourself for others. You can read up on loving kindness. Okay? But the idea is that you start your meditation and you think of your mother. And you think of what your mother endured, not after you were born, just to get you there. Right? Afterward was a totally different story, especially when you got to your teenage years. But think of how uncomfortable, her body was during the time that she carried you. Think of the things that she wanted to do that she couldn't do because she was carrying you. Think of the physical pain of the childbirth that she endured as your little body was passing through the birth canal. And there you are, this little kind of slimy, mucus-covered, blood-covered, little worm-looking thing, wailing your lungs away, learning how to breathe. And yet she loved you. And she took you as messy as you were and held you against her flesh and began to feed you with nourishment from her own body as she cleaned you up. And we think as mothers go through life, as we go through life, think of what mothers do for their children, The children will have clothes before mom goes and gets clothes. The children will have food before mom has food. They always come first. They always come first. She'd do without to send her children to school, to send them to college. This is the unconditional love of a mother for a child. And what the Buddhist meditation asks us to do is to really get in that feeling, of what this mother's love, what a mother's love for her only child is like. And then to realize that this being, your mother, also suffered and is suffering. And what would you do to relieve that suffering? Now here we have to understand that we don't want to take on that suffering. We don't want to bring sickness and suffering to ourselves, but we just want to be compassionate. We want to be empathetic. We want to be aware of the suffering of humanity and have a sincere desire to eliminate that. Dr. James Golden was a former president of Religious Science International back in around 2000 when Lori and I graduated ministry school. And he started to study with Don Miguel Ruiz, the Four Agreements mystic from Mexico. And he said that Don Miguel, he was at a workshop somewhere, and Don Miguel was on the stage, and they were going through some exercise with everybody, and everybody was having some sort of an experience. And Don Miguel called James Golden up on stage, and he said to him, "Look out there. Look out there. What do you see?" And James said that he was suddenly overwhelmed with sadness, with pain, with suffering. He said it was as if he had tuned into all of the problems that all of the people had, all of the burdens that they were carrying into that hall. And he was overwhelmed, and he started to weep. He started to weep uncontrollably under the weight of this suffering. And Don Miguel turned to him and said to him, don't get caught up in it. It's all a delusion. It's all a delusion. Why is there suffering in the world? There is suffering in the world because of delusions, because of wrong thinking. And what we want to do is not get caught up in the suffering, but to commit ourselves to doing our part, to cleaning up the delusions. So as we think of our mother and we think of her love and we think of the sacrifices she made for us, and we think of how she might have suffered or be suffering, what we want to do is we want to breathe in and then breathe out and try to cover her with the light of truth. Through this meditation, false ideas are dissolved. Pain and suffering exist. Pain and suffering don't need to exist. They exist because of erroneous thoughts, beliefs, and ideas. This is a Buddhist teaching. And now we are doing our part to think correctly and to share that correct thinking with others. And then what we can do is we can recognize that all sentient beings, whether they be our physical mother or not, all sentient beings are deserving of the same love. They all suffer. They all suffer because of delusional thinking. And what we can do is not participate in that delusional thinking anymore, but rather open our hearts up. Let ourselves experience compassion. Let ourselves feel the love of God, and let that love extend to each and every other person. I think what we all want as we awaken, what we all want is we want to have the experience of the love and the presence of God. In order to do that, we have to open our hearts. We have to pass through that heart chakra. We have to move into the love and the compassion, no matter what society tells us to do. Oh, don't get caught up in those details. We have to allow ourselves to feel the love, to feel the compassion, to feel the presence of God. And we have to learn not to get caught up in the delusion. But even, kind of like going back to the Bible, even in the furnace, to understand that God is good. Even Daniel in the lion's den, to understand that God is good. So what we want to do then is we want to bring ourselves from not just saying God is good and God is all there is, not just kind of drilling that down into our subconscious mind, but bringing ourselves to connecting with that feeling so that our treatment work, our prayer, is coming from that feeling that God is all there is, and God is good, and love is all there is, and love is good. And it pains me to know that my brothers are suffering. It pains me to know. But I do what I can to relieve that suffering. And that may include my charity. That may include charitable giving. But most importantly, it includes charitable consciousness. Opening our hearts to love. So today, in lieu of a closing treatment today, what I would like to do is I would like to do a guided meditation that we used to do in the center. And it's just perfect because I invite everyone today, let's come together and let's imagine ourselves in the rocking chairs down on the beach with Jeannie and John. And we're all sitting there looking at the waves, which are very active because of the winds offshore. And we can feel the power of nature. We can see the beautiful sun. We can smell the salt air. And our chairs are in a circle, and we reach out and take hands. So our group is now linked in a circle as we sit together in this beautiful place. And now what we do is we allow our consciousness to expand beyond our skin. We realize that our spirit is not bound by the flesh. And it reaches out until it touches the spirit of those on either side. We feel the unity. We feel the love. And now we imagine that there's an opening in our hearts, and out of this opening, on either side, a light is shining. It is the light of God's love. And it touches the light of the person on either side. There is a bright light running through the entire circle, touching each one at our hearts. And we can feel the incredible love in this group. We can feel the presence of God in this group. We can feel the goodness in this group. And now each and every one of us, we let the light go from our hearts and find someone in this world who, as at this very moment, crying out for love. And we let this light, that is not our light, but comes to us from the love of God, we let our light fill their hearts. We give freely of that which has been given to us. Each and every one of us. And when they are filled with love, they too open their hearts and they let a bridge of light flow out to find another somewhere in this world who is crying out for love. And so on, and so on, and so on, until we visualize the entire planet covered with beams of crisscrossing light, the love of God that touches each and every one. As we close today, we remember this. We are God's instruments of love. We didn't come here to collect stuff. We came here to express love. And in so doing, we must open our hearts. And today, we commit to doing just that. And so it is.